Hey, Dave.
Hey, David, this is a great day, and I'm kind of excited about this one today. So I'm going to kind of lead, but we're going to have a great story about a great opportunity when TCA made a great home run.
All right, so let me just do this. Let me just do the quick intro, and then I'm going to go backstage, sit back, kick back, enjoy a nice cool drink on a warm day, and enjoy the discussion.
Oh, Dave,
This is
I'll miss
David
you.
Friedman. I'm co-host with my other co-host, Dave Berkus, for TCA Crossroads, where entrepreneurs and investors connect. And this is a really great connection. So I'm going to bring, without further ado, Bob Richardson on. And as soon as I say hello, I'm going to go sit back and kick back. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Great.
I am really looking for your talk with Dave to share with the world how you can become a successful entrepreneur. And by investing in smart people like you, the investors can make a healthy return on investment. So with that set up, I am going to go backstage, kick back, and enjoy this discussion. And I'll see you in a little while.
Bob, this is going to be fun. First of all, you and I have known each other for what, 20 years?
Believe it or not, 30.
30, see?
Time
30
flies.
years.
Very long time.
So we're going to have a conversation here that I think the listeners are going to enjoy because it relates to some excitement. It's a company, well, we'll go earlier than that, but it's a company that was able to find its footing, pivot, and make a major exit, which is one of the success stories for our TCA fund. So Bob, since I've known you for that long, 30 years, I'm going to start by asking you a couple of questions. Like, number one, give me your background that goes back to the 1990s. Ooh.
Yeah, I think so. It started in 1992, and I decided I was at the time I was heading up the Sybase consulting team here in Southern California, and I to this day I remember a guy that said, "Hey, you're too young to really run the area." And I thought, well, okay, I'm selling the business, I'm hiring the people. I don't know much about this accounting thing, not so good on marketing, but I think I can maybe I'll just do this on my own. So I did. And
Yeah.
that was actually my first business was consulting. And then we very quickly realized you're not building a lot of equity. So we started trying to build product. And then that led to being the first managed services provider starting about 1995, and then venture capital funded in 98 by Mayfield Fund and Foundation Capital, so the Silicon Valley guys. And we built that. It was on a tear until the whole dot bomb in 2000. We were on the wrong end of a Series B. We decided to delay right at the wrong time. So that's one of those things that I'm a firm believer that there's good timing that helps entrepreneurs along the way. If you're a little lucky, can't plan everything.
We will have that discussion when we talk about the exit. Exactly. Go ahead.
Definitely. Yeah. And so then I joined Primal Solutions, where Joe, who I've known Joe just as long as I've known you, and we had always said, hey, we'd love to work together. And so he hired me to build his services team, and then we did that, and I grew it by about 600% in the first year and almost the same amount in the second year. So it was a pretty big thing. So it was a small public company. Like many small companies, we had 40% customer concentration on one customer, and that customer, for reasons out of our control, went away. And then we ended up being able to buy the assets and basically take it private, which created Billwise. And so we started off with these telecom assets and said, hey, we don't like the telecom industry. What are we going to do with this stuff? And then it's a very long story about how we got into student loan servicing, but we did. And then that got kind of shut down. And then we pivoted to payment plans. And I think that takes us pretty close to when TCA comes into the picture.
So did you hear that, everybody? That's the first pivot. And you're going to hear more.
That's the first. And I don't play basketball, but I feel like I did.
So this is where I kind of got involved again after having known Bob for all this time. And I led the deal with TCA. And it was one that Bob and Joe packaged as something called extend credit. So let's move on to that evolution as the very next step.
Yeah, and so what Joe and I decided to do was we had a nice steady cash flow from some telecom customers that had been on the system 20 plus years and really had no way off of it. We kind of cornered the remaining paging billing in the world, which, believe it or not, still happens today. There are
Oh,
actually
yeah.
still pagers in the world. And so we really just decided, hey, that's not a way to grow a business, but it's a great cash flow that lets us fund a certain amount of development. And so that's where we started. And then we realized, we with Extend Credit, we're like, hey, we're tired of funding it. We can't grow it as quickly as we want. But we also want a board that helps us get out of our heads. Because if it's just Joe and I have known each other so long, we're going, sometimes we just agree with each other because we've known each other for so long. You're going, hey, we need some dissenting opinions to help this thing really nurture and grow. So, and since I've known Dave for so long, Tech Coast Angels was one of the first that we looked at. We knew we didn't want private equity. We knew we didn't want venture capital because we're like, hey, we really want to kind of have, we're not sure this is 100% where we're going to end up, but we want to make sure we've got a team that works with us versus saying, hey, we're just going to drive and you're either going to make it or we're going to explode you. And so that was really a big reason for focusing with the Tech Coast Angel team and Pasadena Angels at the time, which is part of Tech Coast Angels now.
Right. And so I remember very well the times that we kind of took you around, paraded you in front of investors, and got the investment and began what turned out to be Extend Credit. So Extend Credit had a very definite marketplace. Talk for a few seconds about what that was and then how it pivoted.
Yeah, so we started off with doing doctor-backed payment plans. So instead of a doctor using third-party financing like Care Credit or a host of others, the dentist, we had mostly dentists, and then some veterinarians would basically say, hey, if you can pay for half of it with insurance and out of pocket, I'll cover the other half myself with some interest level, and then you just have to service the terms. And so there's a lot of recurring billing, a lot of recurring payments, things like that, and we handled that. And so it really started off working. I mean, we worked with aviation schools. The most random one was a mortuary, trucking school. I mean, we were all over the map. And so at the time, we were thinking, hey, we've got this great horizontal product. Let's just roll, and we can do this in every industry, which turned out to not be the case.
You remember the mattress company? I mean, there were just all kinds
Yes.
of wild businesses.
Yes. Yes,
Indeed.
I do.
Okay, so it really meant that it was difficult to find product market fit, and the company was continuing at the same time as you and Joe had begun another company whose name I'll let you give us, and it was kind of dividing your time, which
Yes.
as your chairman, I was beginning to worry a little about. So tell me about that company, and then we'll put them together in a minute.
Yeah, and we had talked about that beforehand. And so Joe and I were trying to maintain a very kind of tight line between my focus with the Extend Credit team and Joe's on that. But there's only, I mean, you can do a certain amount, but there's really only, there's headspace. And so you're going, well, if I'm a part owner of that, I can't not be in that headspace a little bit. And so one of the big things we looked at was kind of the trifecta for me able to, in the veterinary space, to be able to deal with your pet is pet insurance, which we knew we didn't want to be in. Payment plans, if for some reason there's out-of-pocket money, which there always is out-of-pocket money with veterinarians, and then preventive care plans, which are called wellness plans or care plans. So we knew that Extend Credit was focused on, hey, let's do these payment plans, and these care plans just started evolving. And so VCP, which was H3 Financials, which was doing business as VCP, started going after the private label credit card, which is a direct competitor to Care Credit. And that got a pretty good head of steam. VCP did. And so Joe was running with that, and I was focused on Extend Credit. We're trying to keep our brains, kind of cooperating, but we were still losing, and we were trying to do the same thing in the dental market with the same teams. And so that was one of the conversations I think with the board that was really kind of a turning point. Was like, hey, we're not going to get anywhere if we don't get some focus here, right? We can't
Exactly.
That was one of the things that I think was a big turning point, and why our board was so crucial at that point was kind of helping us come to that conclusion, because it's not easy to step away from other things you've been kind of successful at to say we're going to focus on this where we're confident we can be very successful. Not
so
trivial.
it was two corporations. I was your chairman for one, and the other corporation was doing this kind of a pivot from credit cards to what it turned out to be. And the obvious thing to do was to merge the two companies together, which we negotiated kind of arm's length. I had to be the outsider, you were the insider. And that worked well. All of our shareholders voted for it. Everybody was happy. We are now, at this point in the discussion, H3, and maybe I'll let you take it from there. The combined company, its new name, and what it did and how it grew into VCP.
Yeah, so I think one of the neat things about the merger was that we said, hey, we've got some traction with VCP because VCP had done a lot of marketing, and so it had name recognition. Extend Credit still was in mattresses. I mean, it was in a bunch of different stuff, but it had the largest customer possible, the veterinary industry, VCA. So like, okay, well, clearly there's a big customer, and that's 1,000 location, customer that has a big multi-year contract. So what we realized was, hey, we have the best traction in the veterinary space. And so Joe and I are like, okay, hey, I was focused so much in the veterinary space that it made sense for me to kind of say, hey, this is what we're going to do. If we want to try to exit something, we really need to be able to get focus and clarity. And that was the neat thing about the merger was it got the entire team kind of organized and going down the same path of, hey, we're going to go do this. We're going to dominate the veterinary industry, and we're going to become the top solution that is the cat's meow, everything it could be. And that was a big deal. I mean, getting through that was, you were very instrumental in helping both sides because we had investors on both sides, some common investors between the two, Tech Coast Angels folks passing. I mean, there was a lot of talking to do to get everyone up to speed on why it was the right thing to do. But at the end, I think, well, if we hadn't done it, we wouldn't have had an exit. I mean, we would have gone down some different path. Maybe it would have, but we wouldn't have had the exit we have. I don't think.
And we're previewing the exit before we talk about what we really did to grow the company. So let's go back one step. There's an interesting little twist here. Joe knew that he wanted at some point to be able to get out because he was getting a little older. He had been in this for so long, and you were younger than Joe and had a lot of energy to do this. And we had that dynamic to work with, which worked well.
Yes.
Joe's financial expertise, your operational expertise. I did nothing, but this is now a point where, as we formed this combined company, it was with the exit in mind. And so spend a few seconds about that, and then what we did with it as we began with this pivot to VCP to grow what turned out to be a good, large company.
Yeah, so what's interesting is for those of you know Dave, there's a matrix you create on if you're going to try to sell your company of what they want and who they are, and there's a whole bunch of things that you go through. And so we 100% believe in that, and we went through that exercise, and we identified the most likely candidates, and one of them being a public company. And one of the things that really helped, since Joe and I have public company background, we're going, if we go that direction, we're going to get audited. Right, they have to. They're a public company. If we want specifically, if we want to do the QSBS stock, which we wanted to, then they're 100% going to audit us for several years. And so one of the things that was kind of our secret weapon was that we had a public company auditor as our CFO, and so she ran us, as small as we were, like we were a public company.
Janet, unbelievably.
Janet, yes. Mm-hmm. And I'm a firm believer that you need to have your financial house in order too. I mean, other companies that bought by our eventual company that bought us, they were like, it took us, like months and months to get through the account. I'm like, ours was about 2 weeks. And frankly, Janet was convinced the two things they found they were wrong on, but that was a different issue. I told her it's okay, let it go. Two is not bad. But it really was, how do we get organized and make sure that we're going to exit well? And one of the things I know that I had in my head on previous ventures was the acquirers are always like, hey, if I bring you all of this business, how are you not just going to get crushed under the load?
Right.
And for me, I was like, okay, no one ever did that. They always worry about it, but I was like, bring it on. I'd like to see it before I worry too much about it. But I was like, okay, we're going to get that question. And so we spent a solid year looking at people, process, and technology and saying, hey, how are we going to answer this question? How are we going to scale people? How is the software being built so that it can automate more things? And if AI had been a big thing, we would have had a lot more AI initiatives. back then to help with the scale. But we really spent a lot of time so that when diligence started, um, you know, theoretically, when we finally got to that point, that we wouldn't be getting kind of chiseled down on the price. That we're saying there may be other reasons we don't get what we want, but we're not going to lose it on diligence. That was a big thing, at least for me and my team.
Well said. And so what this is, as a lesson for the people who are listening, is that sometimes you form a company with the exit in mind. And when you do that, you have an opportunity to be much more organized. Things like data rooms, planning, as Bob just told you, other things that help you make something happen and give you more value. Janet
Yes.
herself added value just by the quality of the work that she had prepared. You added value. Your salespeople added value. It went on and on. So now, let's talk about preparation for the exit, which isn't fair because in the meantime, in 16 seconds, we can say this company grew to kind of dominate its niche at a point when we could say for the veterinary care industry, we had the largest of the possible organizations as customers. Right. And people knew us. Anybody in the industry knew us. So now it was time to go for the exit. Remember, Joe was pushing us toward this, and we were all on that side too. Talk about the banker selection and the preparation phases. It gets really interesting now.
Yeah, and I'm really fortunate because my business partner Joe he's done a lot of M&A over his career. I mean, at least 20 plus things where he's either the CFO or the CEO buying and selling things. And so I was like, great, because someone's got to keep the wheels on this thing, and we've got to keep getting customers and doing all of that. But we've got to pick the right banker. And so we looked at 3 different bankers, ultimately ended up selecting a banker we'd been talking with for several years who had focused more on the insurance side, but he looked at what we did and was like, hey, this is really kind of adjunct to insurance. It's the preventive care side. And so we ultimately ended up kind of picking each other. We were probably a little smaller than they normally liked. Yeah. So we kind of, he just loved what we were doing. And when they did the research in the industry, a big thing that we had worked on, and again, marketing hasn't been my strongest background, but we have a very strong marketing guy that was like, hey, we want to be the sage brand in this industry, meaning we want to be the people when they have the conversation. So you need to go talk to those guys because they're the experts. And you can want that and you can say you are that, but having other people tell you are that is a very different thing than wanting it. There's a little more work there. And we had done an awful lot of stuff. We were the top pick for all of the thought leading associations in our industry. So by the time we kind of got to the bankers were like, wow, everybody, all of our fact checking leads back to you guys as the leader. And at the time, I don't know if I understood how important that was, but as we get into who bought us, it turned out to be one of the most important things besides all of our prep. But yeah, so that was the banker process was probably 2 or 3 months, and we had really good options, but ultimately settled on Houlihan Lokey.
And Houlihan would never have dropped down to a company of our size had you not had that kind of organization. And it really does make some sense. And of course, that kind of a name for ourselves. So Houlihan got involved. They built the book. They contacted 100 companies. You got how many serious bids?
We ended up with, I think 15 or 16 saying, hey, we're definitely interested. Yeah. It was probably 8 to 10 bids that were like, hey, those are kind of right in that ballpark that we would probably take, if it was just money, that any of those 10 would have made sense. There were 2 or 3 that were like, okay, well, those are like the leaders because they're in industry, there's so much synergy and we think they could actually, help a lot, not just with the money, but with the delivery of the service and whatnot.
So finally, there were just a couple of them, as you said. One of them stood out, both in the amount that they bid and the way in which they bid. It was virtually all cash. I know you had to take some stock, Bob. We'll talk about that maybe. But it turns out that there was a major company that wanted to buy you, one that was well known. And if you'll take it from there as far as the fit and the diligence, and then finally the structure of the transaction, not in too many words, but just to give us an idea of how a difficult process can be made a little bit more simple by people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, so I think backing up just a little, because it kind of comes to this, one of the things that I realized was in all of my previous companies, the potential acquirers like, hey, you're the key man. If you don't stay with this thing for multiple years, we're not doing it. And
Yes.
I'm kind of a whirling dervish in large companies, and so I knew, hey, I'm not going to be good for them, and they're not going to be good for me. But during that period where we were getting everything ready, I made sure the team that would be left behind if I left, so my ops guy, my engineering guy, finance, all these people could literally run the company without me. And when I left 14 months out later, which we'll talk about a little bit, they picked it and they didn't even miss a heartbeat. I mean, the business just was completely functioning. And so the reason I bring that up is when you're kind of negotiating terms, if you're trying to get to only having a 12-month hold on what you're getting held back versus a 36-month, if they believe that the company can't survive without you, they won't budge off the 36. If they believe they can, then you have a chance of talking them down to 18 or 12. And so as we kind of get into it, that was a big thing we had been focused on was, hey, how do I make sure that I don't get stuck too long with this thing and I don't get a bunch of my money tied up for a really long time? So yeah, so we went through it. We started going through the diligence with we got it down to two folks. The eventual buyer, Covetris, they had a meeting about 8 months before we had done the process, and they had said, "Hey, we think this care plan thing is really important." And what was interesting was they said, "Hey, we think it's strategic." Again, we find this out later. Well, all of a sudden, when they go out to the industry and say, "Hey, who's the leading provider?" all roads led to us. So as our provider, and initially I was like, I'm not sure I like those guys. They're second in my mind because they're a big company, blah, blah, blah. And it turned out I was wrong and it was the best thing to do. But it was really, that part I think we got a little lucky on, in that they had identified that they had to have this sort of thing to really leverage all of their products, because they do distribution and practice management. They do a bunch of different things. So that really kind of got it down to two. And then the bankers really did their job. I mean, we had agreed as a board that we were going to settle, if we had a number in this range, that we would take it. And they got probably close to 50% above that.
They did. And
And
they were given a bonus for doing that. It was well done in every way.
it was, and I've had mixed luck with bankers in the past. And I think it's just that's a whole different podcast, I'm sure, on picking your banker. But if you pick carefully, I mean, and they do their job, I mean, it's stellar. I mean, it's amazing to watch how well they did their job. And one of the big things they did was keeping the tougher negotiations kind of separate from the team that's delivering, because we have to go live with them. But yeah, so that ended up being the number, and the number was a very rough number for them, because they were used to buying companies, 3 to 5 companies a year on EBITDA. And if you did it on EBITDA, it would have been, I think, 3,200x on EBITDA. So clearly they didn't buy us on EBITDA. And their CFO, literally, I was on a call where he was like, "What are we thinking?" And we're going, "Well, you're not buying it on EBITDA, you're buying it on ARR." And we had a little different version of how we calculated ARR based on the way we had compounded recurring revenue, which is a whole different concept. But that was a big part of what the banker had to do, is just say, "Hey, we've got to do that." And so we ended up a little over 21.5, I think, X on
That's right,
ARR.
times ARR, which was very high, even for the time. And I was about to talk about the time. So maybe we do. David and I have dissected some of the stats. The height for M&A turned out to be about October 2021. When did we do our deal, Bob?
We closed July 9th, 2021, and that was about 2 months of diligence. Yeah, so we were right in that, near the peak. Two things: we were at the peak of what people were spending, and we were also at the peak of promise, because we had a huge backlog of customers that had signed up that we had to deliver.
Do you hear that, everybody? Timing is everything. And if they got 21 times, the number for ARR has drifted back down to 6 to 8. Times have changed, and we are now at a point where we look back, and this was one of TCA's best deals, partly because of the quality of management, partly because of the preparation, but partly because of the timing.
Yep.
So the structure, Bob, I want you to kind of tell us that you had to stay behind because you had to take a giant chunk of stock. So you were the only one left behind with a lot to gain.
Yeah, it was, it's always tricky when it comes down to it, right? And you're going, well, because we focused on a cash deal. We have been around long enough to know earnouts are dicey at best, and we weren't interested in them. And that was one
Right.
of the things they went down, and we're like, it's not part of the deal. Luckily, we had a competitive bid, and our bankers did their job. Like, you're not going to get this company with any earnout, so don't do it. So we had all cash deal, which is not what they normally do, but we got that. The key for me was that they had a chunk held back for up to 18 months, and it wasn't really an earnout. I could have left at 12 months. It's just that I wouldn't have access to that cash until 18 months. And the theory they had was, well, you're going to stay just to make sure that the asset performs, because if it doesn't, you're going to underperform on your backside. And so it was kind of, it was a little different than what you see in typical technical deals, which is, tied more to either an earnout or something like that. This was more, hey, we just want to make sure that we've got kind of this holdback. But yeah, so that it turned out being shorter because they got taken private by a private equity firm, and that changed the dynamics of this a little bit.
And so you were able to cash out and leave, which is the bottom line. Cash out for you meant that you had to take stock. And so for
Correct.
you, it was the vagaries of the public marketplace, not just what was happening with the Covetrus. So you had a lot of different things to think about, and you were able to exit. And we're going to have to end this one pretty soon. But the bottom line is we have some lessons that we teach and we learn out of this. Number one, it's okay to pivot. Number two, a great management team always beats an idea because the idea can always be improved. And number three is plan the exit as you plan the entrance so that you have a real idea of where you're taking the ship. So,
Yeah.
Bob, now that I've said that, and here comes David back in again, give us a little last word of advice as if we are the entrepreneur. What would you say to an entrepreneur that is looking to start a business right now or is just in that phase as we were at the start?
Well, I think the one thing I'd add to your thing, well, I'm sure there's lots, but one core thing would be your board. I mean, and having a board that is functional, that is cohesive, that everyone's able to kind of work through. Because we had some tough times, like every company, we had a couple times we had to go get more cash, and we had to do various different things. And it's all fun and games until you're going, hey, we're really running short here. And as you're doing the pivots, having some sage advice on, hey, we can pivot lots of different directions. How do you pick the right direction? And so, having that board that works together, that is harmonious, because there are a lot of dysfunctional boards that I hear about. I haven't had one, but I've heard about them. And that creates a lot of distraction. And so that's a big deal, I think, as a entrepreneur, figuring out what kind of money you want to get, because they all have different kinds of behaviors. So there's small PE firms, there's big PE firms, there's venture capital, there's a bunch of stuff. There's Tech Coast Angels, the Angels route. And I think, spending some real time there and figuring out the type of money that makes the most sense for what you're trying to create is a worthy exercise.
Thank you. As your chairman, we had very little dissension. We all knew what we wanted. We talked already about the planning process, really starting at the point when we began the company. So it was not hard at all. All right, Bob, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Great.
I hope other people got a lot out of this. And David, I'm going to turn it back to you, and you can just do what you're going to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I just enjoyed sitting back and listening. I actually took notes, and I came away with the following. Stephen Covey in The 7 Habits of Effective People, I'm a big fan of him. He said, begin with the end in mind. I really like the perspective, especially both from an entrepreneur, you have an end goal, and the investor understands that end goal. Number two, the importance of the integration between the investor and the entrepreneur. Having a really strong team is really critical. And I'm really pleased to see TCA Venture Group being involved in trying to help the entrepreneur through a board seat, advisory role, board observer, or whatever. But the real key issue, and I was smiling when you said timing is everything. We're in this wobbly, kind of economy right now where things are up and down in the public market. But I think today is the best time to invest, because as things go through the cycle, by the time that the company is ready to exit, it should be another good exit. And that's what I am personally counting on. I appreciate you coming on board. I appreciate, Dave, you doing the interview with Bob. This was really good for me. I mean, I enjoyed my my afternoon just sitting back, kicking back. And for David Friedman and Dave Berkus and Bob Richardson, this is TCA Crossroads, where investors and entrepreneurs connect. And I think this was an excellent connection, and I really appreciate it. Have a good day.